Girl returns from death with a terrifying revelation about heaven. Amara Davis didn't believe in heaven, not the heaven her grandmother had described during bedtime stories or the glowing paradise often depicted in movies. As a second-year philosophy student at Howard University, Amara prided herself on questioning everything. To her, concepts like heaven and hell were relics of a more fearful, less enlightened era. If it can't be seen or measured, it probably doesn't exist, she often told her classmates during debates in the library. But that didn't mean she wasn't curious. Amara had always been fascinated by the power such beliefs held over people. How could an idea with no tangible proof command so much faith, fear, and loyalty? It was a question she often thought about while scrolling through social media, watching heated arguments about everything from politics to religion. Lately, one name dominated those debates: Donald Trump. Trump's face was everywhere, his rallies, his speeches, his followers' unwavering devotion. To Amara, he wasn't just a man. He was a symbol of a system built on control, a figurehead for those who used fear and division to manipulate the masses. She didn't hate him, but she couldn't ignore the unease he stirred in her. There was something about him that felt larger than life, almost orchestrated. The day her life changed, Amara wasn't thinking about Trump or heaven. She was thinking about her midterms and the protest she'd agreed to attend after class. The demonstration was against a controversial new policy proposed by Trump's political allies, a law that would severely limit free speech on college campuses. Amara wasn't usually the protesting type, but this felt personal. The bill threatened the kind of open debate she cherished, and she couldn't stand idly by while it passed. The protest was scheduled to take place near the Capitol, and by the time Amara arrived, the crowd was already massive. Signs bobbed in the air, voices rose in chants, and a sea of people pressed together, their collective energy electric. Amara joined a group of students from her philosophy class, feeling a surge of pride as she raised her fist in solidarity. But the mood shifted as the afternoon wore on. A small counter-protest had formed on the other side of the street, and their chants clashed with those of Amara's group. The tension was palpable, like a tightly wound string ready to snap. Police officers lined the streets, their presence both reassuring and intimidating. Amara tried to stay focused, but her attention was drawn to a news van parked nearby. The screen on its side displayed a live feed of Trump at a rally, his voice booming over the crowd's noise. His words sent a chill down her spine. "These so-called protests aren't about freedom," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "They're about silencing people like you and me. They're about control. And we're not going to let them win." The crowd roared its approval, and Amara felt a knot form in her stomach. She turned away from the screen, trying to shake off the unease. But as she stepped into the street to cross to the other side, everything happened at once. A car barreled toward her, its horn blaring. Amara froze, her body refusing to move as the headlights grew closer. She heard someone scream her name, but it was too late. The impact was violent, the sound of metal colliding with flesh reverberating in her ears. And then, everything went dark. When Amara opened her eyes, she wasn't on the street anymore. She wasn't anywhere. She floated in a vast, gray void, her body weightless, her mind struggling to comprehend what she was seeing. The space around her was endless, stretching in every direction without definition or boundary. It wasn't dark, but it wasn't light either. There was nothing. She tried to move, to speak, but her body wouldn't respond. Panic set in as she realized she didn't have a body, not in the way she understood it. She was aware, but she wasn't physical. It was as though she had been stripped down to her essence, her consciousness floating untethered in this strange, featureless expanse. Then came the whispers. They started faint, like a breeze brushing past her ears. But they grew louder, more insistent, until they surrounded her completely. They weren't in any language she recognized, but she understood them all the same. They were fragments of thoughts, feelings, and memories, none of them her own. "She doesn't belong here. Another one too soon. Don't let her see." The whispers sent a chill through her being, and for the first time, she felt something other than fear. She felt watched. Amara's awareness sharpened, and she realized she wasn't alone. Shadows moved in the distance, barely visible against the gray expanse. They were humanoid but wrong, Too tall, too thin, their limbs bending in unnatural ways. They didn't have faces, but she could feel their attention fixed on her, their presence invasive and suffocating. She wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. Instead, the whispers grew louder, overlapping into a cacophony that made her mind feel like it was splitting apart. The shadows began to move closer, their forms shifting and distorting with each step. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The shadows froze, their elongated bodies trembling as though something had commanded them to halt. The gray void around her began to change, the mist thinning to reveal a landscape unlike anything she had ever seen. It was vast and golden, stretching out in every direction with no discernible end. Structures rose from the ground, towers of light that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. It was beautiful, but in a way that felt wrong, like a painting with colors that didn't quite belong. At the center of it all was a throne. It stood atop a massive platform, its surface gleaming as though made of liquid gold. Chains hung from its sides, their links glowing faintly, as though they were alive. The throne was empty, but it radiated a power so immense that Amara felt herself drawn to it, despite every instinct screaming at her to stay away. As she floated closer, she noticed figures standing around the throne. They were similar to the shadows but more defined, their forms cloaked in blinding light. They didn't move or speak, but their presence was overwhelming, pressing down on her like a physical weight. The whispers returned, quieter this time, but no less unsettling. They seemed to come from the throne itself, wrapping around her thoughts like tendrils. She cannot stay. She must not see. The truth will break her. Amara tried to pull away, but something held her in place. The throne loomed closer, its chains rattling as though reacting to her presence. And then, without warning, a voice cut through the whispers, deep and commanding. "Do you understand now?" Amara froze. The voice didn't come from the throne or the figures around it. It came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating deep within her. It wasn't a question, it was a demand. I don't understand anything," she managed to reply, her voice barely more than a thought. The voice seemed to chuckle, low and menacing. "You will." Before she could respond, the light around the throne intensified, swallowing everything in its glow. The last thing she saw before the world disappeared was the chains tightening, their links pulsing with a sickly, golden light. And then she fell. Amara's descent felt endless, like she was being pulled through a chasm that stretched forever. The golden light from the throne gave way to shadows, swirling around her like smoke. Her mind reeled as she tried to process what she had just seen, what she had felt. Heaven? Could that have been heaven? But it wasn't the warm, glowing paradise her grandmother had described. No, this place was different. Wrong. Terrifying. When she finally stopped falling, Amara found herself standing, or rather, existing, on a barren plain. The ground beneath her was smooth, almost metallic, and stretched out in every direction like an endless mirror. The sky above was a sickly shade of gray, and the air was thick with tension, like the atmosphere before a storm. But what unnerved her the most was the silence. It wasn't peaceful, it was oppressive, suffocating, as though the world itself was holding its breath. In the distance, she saw a figure. It wasn't one of the shadows or the beings she had seen near the throne. This figure was clear, solid, and unmistakably human. As it moved closer, Amara's breath caught in her throat. She recognized him. Donald Trump. He was dressed in a dark suit, his red tie stark against the colorless landscape. But there was something off about him, something more than his physical presence. His movements were deliberate, calculated, and his eyes, those cold, piercing eyes, seemed to see right through her. Amara froze, her mind racing. Why was he here? Was this some kind of twisted illusion? Or had she truly stumbled into something far greater than she could comprehend? "Well," Trump said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the empty plain. "Look who's here." The skeptic? Amara's heart pounded in her chest. What is this? Why are you here?" Trump smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was sharp, predatory. "This is what's behind the curtain, sweetheart. You didn't think heaven was all clouds and harps, did you?" Amara took a step back, her instincts screaming at her to run. But there was nowhere to go. "This isn't heaven," she said, her voice trembling. "It can't be." Trump laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally in the empty space. "Oh, it's heaven all right. Or at least, it's what heaven really is. The part they don't show you in Sunday school." Amara shook her head, her mind rejecting his words even as a sinking feeling settled in her gut. "You're lying." "Am I?" Trump took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. "You saw the throne. You saw the chains. You heard the whispers. Do you think those things came from nowhere? Heaven isn't some paradise, kid. It's a machine. A system. And it's been running the show since the beginning." She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong. But the memories of what she had seen, the distorted angels, the oppressive light, the whispers that spoke of control and fear, were burned into her mind. Her voice faltered. Why are you here?" Trump's smile widened, his eyes gleaming. "Because I've been part of the system for a long time. People like me? We're its tools. Its messengers. We keep the machine running. And let me tell you, business is booming." Amara's stomach churned. "You're saying you work for that thing on the throne?" Trump chuckled. "Work for it? I'm one of its favorite agents. People think I'm just some businessman, some politician. But the truth is, I've been doing heaven's work for years. Spreading fear, division, control. That's what keeps the system alive." She shook her head again, her voice rising. "That doesn't make sense. Heaven is supposed to be about love, about peace." "Love?" Trump interrupted, his tone mocking. "Peace? That's what they tell you to keep you in line. The truth is, heaven doesn't care about love or peace. It cares about power. Every prayer, every act of worship, it all feeds the throne. Keeps the machine running. And people like me make sure the supply never runs out." Amara felt a wave of nausea wash over her. "You're lying. You have to be." "Am I?" Trump gestured to the horizon, and the sky above them began to change. Images appeared, flickering like a slideshow. Amara saw churches filled with people, their heads bowed in prayer. She saw televangelists shouting from pulpits, their audiences hanging on their every word. She saw protests, riots, wars, all in the name of faith, all justified by the promise of heaven. "You see," Trump said, his voice low and dangerous. "It's all connected. Every act of devotion, every word of scripture, it all feeds the throne. And when the throne is strong, it rewards its agents. People like me." Amara stared at the images, her mind spinning. "But why would heaven want this?" Trump shrugged. "Because power is addictive. Even for beings like them. They don't care about you or your soul. They care about keeping the machine running, no matter the cost." The ground beneath Amara's feet seemed to shift, the metallic surface rippling like water. She stumbled, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. This can't be real. This can't be the truth." "It's real," Trump said, his voice cold. "And you're part of it now. The fact that you've seen this? That you've seen me? It means they've marked you. You're tied to the system, whether you like it or not." "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "I won't be part of this. I won't feed their power." Trump's smile faded, his expression darkening. "You don't have a choice. No one does. The system owns you. It owns all of us." Amara clenched her fists, a surge of defiance rising within her. "I don't believe you. I won't believe you." Trump took another step closer, his towering form casting a shadow over her. "Believe what you want. But know this, now that you've seen the truth, they won't let you go. They'll come for you. And when they do, you'll wish you had stayed in the dark." The metallic ground began to crack beneath her, golden light spilling through the fractures. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, filling her mind with their chaotic voices. "She cannot escape. She knows too much. Bring her back." Amara's body felt heavy, like she was being pulled downward. The cracks widened, and the light consumed everything around her. Trump's face remained the last thing she saw, his cold eyes gleaming with a twisted satisfaction. "Welcome to the system," he said, his voice echoing as the light swallowed her whole. And then she woke up. Amara jolted awake, her chest heaving as if she had been drowning and finally breached the surface. The blinding fluorescent lights of a hospital room seared her vision, and the smell of antiseptic filled her nostrils. Her body ached everywhere, her head pounding like a drum, her limbs heavy and unresponsive. She blinked, trying to piece together where she was and how she had gotten here. Then it hit her. The accident, the car, the throne, Trump, the whispers. It wasn't a dream. It couldn't have been. The memories were too vivid, too raw, to be a product of her imagination. Her surroundings came into focus. Machines beeped softly beside her, their screens displaying her vitals. A nurse entered the room, her expression one of shock as she saw Amara staring back at her. "Oh my God," the nurse whispered, dropping the clipboard in her hand. "You're awake." Amara tried to speak, but her throat felt like sandpaper. The nurse quickly poured her a glass of water and held it to her lips. As Amara sipped, she noticed the nurse's hands trembling. "We thought we lost you," the nurse said, her voice unsteady. "You were gone for nearly 15 minutes. No pulse, no brain activity. But then, out of nowhere, you just came back. 15 minutes. The words echoed in Amara's mind. She had been dead, clinically dead, for 15 minutes. The realization sent a chill down her spine. She glanced at the nurse, her voice raspy and weak. "What happened?" The nurse hesitated, as if unsure how much to tell her. "You were hit by a car during the protest. They rushed you here, but..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "The doctors said there was nothing they could do." Then suddenly, your heart started beating again. "It's a miracle." Amara's stomach twisted. A miracle? That's what they'd call it, wouldn't they? But she knew the truth. What she had seen on the other side wasn't a miracle, it was a nightmare. Before she could respond, the door burst open, and her mother rushed in, tears streaming down her face. "Amara." "Oh, thank God, baby." She threw her arms around her daughter, holding her tightly as if afraid she might disappear again. Her father followed close behind, his expression a mix of relief and disbelief. "You scared us half to death," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We thought we lost you." Amara wanted to find comfort in their presence, but the weight of what she had experienced hung over her like a storm cloud. She leaned back against the pillows, her mind racing. How could she explain what had happened? Would they even believe her? The nurse excused herself to give them privacy, and Amara's parents began asking her questions about the accident, how she felt, what she remembered. She answered them mechanically, avoiding the parts that didn't make sense, the parts that felt too dangerous to share. But as the days passed and the memories refused to fade, Amara knew she couldn't keep it to herself forever. The images of the throne, the whispers, and Trump's chilling words haunted her every waking moment. She could still hear him saying, "The system owns you. It owns all of us." By the time she was discharged from the hospital, the story of her miraculous recovery had spread. Reporters swarmed the entrance, cameras flashing as they shouted questions at her. Amara shielded her face, her father guiding her into the car as her mother tried to fend off the crowd. "Leave her alone," her mother shouted. "She just survived a near-death experience. Show some respect." But the reporters were relentless. "Amara, what did you see on the other side?" one of them called out. "Do you believe it was heaven?" The question froze her in her tracks. She turned to look at the reporter, her lips parting as if to answer. But no words came. Her father gently tugged her arm, pulling her into the car before she could say anything. The days that followed were a blur. Amara tried to return to her normal routine, but nothing felt normal anymore. Her dreams were plagued by visions of the throne and the shadowy beings that had surrounded it. And Trump, his face, his voice, was always there, a sinister presence she couldn't escape. One night, unable to sleep, she turned on the TV. The screen flickered to life, showing a live broadcast of one of Trump's rallies. He stood behind the podium, his face lit with the glow of camera lights, his voice booming over the cheering crowd. "They call it a miracle," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "A young woman comes back from the dead, and everyone wants to believe it's some sign from above. But let me tell you something, miracles don't just happen. There's always a reason." Amara's breath caught in her throat. Was he talking about her? It seemed impossible, but the way his words hung in the air made her blood run cold. Trump leaned closer to the microphone, his expression darkening. Some people want to use this so-called miracle to push their agenda, to make you question what you know to be true. But don't let them fool you. Heaven isn't some warm, fuzzy place filled with rainbows and unicorns. Heaven is strength. Heaven is order. And heaven doesn't need skeptics telling you otherwise. The crowd erupted in applause, chanting his name as he stepped back from the podium. Amara stared at the screen, her hands trembling. He knew. Somehow, he knew what she had seen. But how? And why was he speaking as if he had seen it too? Her phone buzzed beside her, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a text from her friend Jada, who had been at the protest with her. Did you see the rally? What the hell is he talking about? Amara didn't respond. She couldn't. Her mind was spinning, the pieces of a puzzle she didn't want to solve beginning to fall into place. Trump wasn't just some power-hungry politician. He was tied to the system, the machine she had seen on the other side. The whispers, the throne, the chains, it all connected back to him. The next morning, she decided to speak. If Trump knew about the system, then people needed to know too. They needed to understand what heaven really was, and why they should be afraid. But as she sat down to write her story, the whispers returned. They are watching. You cannot stop it. He will silence you. Amara's pen froze, her chest tightening as the words echoed in her mind. She looked around her room, half expecting to see the shadowy beings standing in the corners. But there was nothing. Just the suffocating weight of their presence. She pushed the whispers aside, her determination outweighing her fear. The world needed to know the truth, no matter the cost. She picked up her pen again, her hand shaking as she began to write. And in the distance, thunder rumbled. Amara's decision to tell her story unleashed a tidal wave she couldn't have anticipated. She shared her account online, posting a video in which she described everything she had seen during her time beyond. Her voice trembled as she spoke of the throne, the chains, the whispers, and most chillingly, her encounter with Trump in the void. Heaven isn't what we've been told, she said, staring directly into the camera. It's not a paradise. It's a system, a machine that feeds on us, on our faith, our fears, our worship. And the people in power, the ones who thrive on division and control, they're part of it. They work for it. The video went viral almost instantly. Within hours, her phone was inundated with messages, some from supporters who thanked her for speaking out, others from skeptics who dismissed her as a liar or a lunatic. Religious leaders condemned her as blasphemous, accusing her of spreading dangerous lies. But what shook her the most were the threats. Anonymous messages flooded her inbox, warning her to stay silent. You don't know what you're playing with? They won't let you ruin this. You've seen too much. You won't survive this. The fear she had tried to suppress began to creep back in. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that the shadowy beings from the void were still lingering just out of sight. She started noticing odd things, her reflection in the mirror flickering for just a moment, the hum of whispers in the silence of her room, shadows moving where they shouldn't. And then there were the strange coincidences. A reporter who had reached out to her for an interview suddenly dropped the story, claiming it was too risky. A friend who had been vocal in supporting her online called to say they were being followed. Even Jada, her closest confidant, begged her to stop. You don't understand, Amara, Jada said over the phone, her voice shaking. This isn't just backlash from some angry people. It's something else. Something bigger. Please, just let it go. But Amara couldn't let it go. She knew the truth, and she couldn't live with herself if she kept it hidden. The world deserved to know what heaven really was, and how deeply it was tied to the power structures that controlled their lives. A week after her video went viral, Amara received an invitation to appear on a popular talk show. The host was known for tackling controversial topics, and they promised her a platform to share her story without censorship. Despite her fear, Amara agreed. She needed to reach as many people as possible, and this felt like the right step. The day of the interview arrived, and as Amara sat in the green room waiting to go on, her nerves were electric. She clutched a glass of water, her hands shaking slightly as she rehearsed what she wanted to say. But her thoughts were interrupted when the television in the corner of the room flickered to life. It was another Trump rally, broadcast live. He stood at the podium, his expression grim, his voice low and deliberate. Amara Davis, he said, the name rolling off his tongue like a curse. A young woman claiming to have seen the truth about heaven. Let me tell you something about people like her. They are dangerous. They sow doubt, fear, and chaos. And they'll stop at nothing to tear down the foundations of our faith, our nation, our strength. The crowd roared in agreement, their chants echoing through the screen. Stop the liar! Stop the liar! Trump raised a hand to silence them, his gaze piercing through the camera as if he were looking directly at Amara. She's not just lying. She's working for something else. Something that wants to destroy us. And I'm not going to let that happen. Amara's heart sank. His words weren't just an attack, they were a declaration of war. He was painting her as a threat, a pawn in some imagined enemy's game. And his followers were eating it up. The producer knocked on the door, snapping her back to the present. "You're on in 5, he said, giving her a reassuring smile that did little to calm her nerves. The studio lights were blinding as Amara took her seat opposite the host. The cameras rolled, and the host began with a soft smile. "Amara, thank you for being here. Your story has captivated the nation, and I think the first thing everyone wants to know is, what did you see?" Amara took a deep breath, her mind flashing back to the throne, the chains, and Trump's chilling words. "I saw what heaven really is," she began, her voice steady despite the tension in her chest. "It's not what we've been told. It's not a paradise. It's a machine, a system that thrives on control. And it's connected to the people who hold power here on Earth." She went on to describe her experience in detail, sparing nothing. The host listened intently, occasionally glancing at the audience, whose reactions ranged from shock to skepticism. But Amara could feel the weight of her words settling in the room. "And what about Donald Trump?" the host asked, leaning forward. "You said he was there. Can you elaborate on that?" Amara hesitated, knowing this would be the most controversial part of her story. "He was there," she said finally. "Not as a victim, but as a part of it. He called himself an agent of the system, someone who keeps it running. He feeds it through fear and division, through control. He's not just a politician. He's tied to something much darker." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. The host cleared their throat, clearly unsure how to respond. But before they could speak, the lights in the studio flickered. Amara's blood ran cold. The flickering wasn't random, it was rhythmic, almost deliberate. The audience murmured uneasily as the cameras struggled to maintain their feed. And then she heard it. The whispers. They were faint at first, barely audible over the hum of the equipment. But they grew louder, filling the room with their eerie cadence. Amara's breath quickened as she recognized the words. "She cannot stop it. She has seen too much. Silence her." The lights went out completely, plunging the studio into darkness. Gasps and shouts filled the air, and Amara felt the weight of something unseen pressing down on her. She tried to speak, to call out, but the whispers drowned her out, their voices merging into a deafening roar. When the lights flickered back on, the studio was empty. The audience, the host, the crew, they were gone. Amara sat alone in her chair, the cameras still pointed at her, their red recording lights blinking like eyes. And then a voice. Not the whispers, but something clearer, more human. "You should have stayed silent." Amara turned, her heart hammering in her chest. Standing at the edge of the set, shrouded in shadow, was Trump. His expression was cold, devoid of the performative bravado he usually displayed. This wasn't the man from the rallies or the debates. This was something else. "They won't let you win," he said, stepping closer. "The system doesn't tolerate dissent. You can tell your story, scream it from the rooftops if you want. But it won't matter. They'll make sure no one believes you." Amara forced herself to stand, her legs trembling. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Why are you part of this?" Trump's smile was chilling. "Because it works. The system rewards those who serve it. And I've always been very good at winning." Before she could respond, the lights flickered again, and the whispers returned, louder than ever. The room began to dissolve, the walls and floor fading into the same gray void she had seen before. And then she was falling again. Amara's fall was different this time. It wasn't endless like before, it was sharp and sudden, like being yanked downward by an invisible chain. Her body, or whatever part of her was falling, felt heavier with each second, weighed down by an oppressive force that made it difficult to think, to breathe, to exist. When she landed, it wasn't with the soft jolt of returning to consciousness. It was with a crushing weight, as though the very ground she hit had risen to meet her with violent intent. She groaned, her senses scrambled, the whispers still faintly echoing in her mind. She forced her eyes open and immediately wished she hadn't. She was back in the void, but it had changed. The once gray, featureless expanse was now fractured, riddled with jagged cracks that leaked golden light. The ground beneath her pulsed like a heartbeat, and in the distance, the throne loomed larger than before. Its chains rattled, glowing brighter with each pulse, as though feeding off the chaos around it. But the throne wasn't empty anymore. Amara's breath caught in her throat as her eyes locked onto the figure seated atop the massive golden chair. It wasn't human, not entirely. It shimmered, its form shifting between a blinding radiance and a dark, shadowy mass. Its face was indistinct, an ever-changing swirl of light and darkness that seemed to look everywhere and nowhere at once. And yet, Amara could feel its gaze pierce through her, heavy and suffocating. "You've returned," the figure said, its voice reverberating through the void like 1,000 echoes collapsing into one. It wasn't a voice meant for human ears. It was something ancient, something vast. Amara struggled to stand, her legs trembling beneath her. "I didn't come back here on purpose," she managed to say, her voice hoarse. "What do you want from me?" The figure leaned forward, its presence overwhelming. The throne seemed to vibrate with its movements, the chains clinking like a sinister melody. "You were not meant to leave," it said. "You have seen what lies behind the veil, and now you threaten the balance. The system cannot allow this." "The system," Amara repeated, her anger bubbling to the surface despite her fear. "What even is this system? Why does it exist? Why does it need people like him?" She spat the words, her mind flashing to Trump's cold, mocking face. The figure tilted its head, the motion unnervingly fluid. "The system is what sustains order," it said. "It is what binds existence together. Without it there is chaos. Order?" Amara shot back, her voice rising. "You call this order? A throne built on chains? A heaven that feeds on fear and control? That's not order, it's oppression." The figure's form flickered, the shadows around it darkening as though her words had struck a nerve. "You speak of what you do not understand," it said, its voice sharper now. "The throne does not oppress. It provides. It sustains. It rewards those who serve." Amara clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "Like Trump? Is that what you mean by rewards? People like him, who spread division and fear, who thrive on manipulating others? That's who you choose to serve you?" The figure's glow dimmed slightly, and for a moment, the whispers in the void quieted. "He is a tool," it said simply, "as are all who wield power in the mortal realm. Their actions feed the throne, ensuring the system remains strong." Amara's stomach churned. "You're saying everything, wars, hatred, oppression, it's all part of your plan? You let people suffer, you let them destroy each other, just to keep this thing running?" The figure leaned back, its form settling into the throne as though amused by her defiance. "Suffering is the price of order. Mortals cannot understand the balance required to maintain existence. They act out of fear, out of greed, out of hope. And in doing so, they feed the system." Amara shook her head, her voice trembling with rage. "No, you don't get to justify this. You don't get to hide behind balance while people die, while the world tears itself apart. This isn't balance, it's exploitation." The figure's light flared, the chains rattling louder as the throne seemed to pulse with energy. "You speak as though you are separate from this system," it said, its voice colder now. "But you are not. You are part of it just as they are. Every choice you make, every word you speak, feeds the throne." Amara felt the weight of its words press down on her, but she refused to give in. That's why I have to stop it, she said, her voice steadier now. If this system is built on fear and control, then it needs to be broken. People deserve better than this. They deserve freedom. The figure's form shifted, its radiance dimming as the shadows around it grew darker. You cannot break what sustains all things, it said. You cannot fight what is eternal. Watch me, Amara shot back, her voice sharp and unwavering. The throne trembled, the cracks in the ground widening as the golden light spilled out in violent bursts. The whispers returned, louder and more chaotic than ever. She must not leave. Silence her. The system must endure. Amara braced herself as the shadows around the throne began to move, coalescing into the forms of the distorted beings she had seen before. Their hollow, featureless faces turned toward her, and their long, spindly limbs reached out, closing the distance between them. But before they could reach her, a voice cut through the chaos. Enough. Amara turned, her heart skipping a beat. Standing at the edge of the fractured plane was Trump, his presence as commanding as it was unnerving. But this time, he wasn't smiling. His expression was unreadable, his eyes cold and calculating as they flicked between Amara and the figure on the throne. The figure hesitated, its form flickering slightly. "You do not belong here," it said, its voice laced with irritation. Trump smirked, his confidence unwavering. "Oh, I think I do. After all, I've done my part, haven't I? Kept the machine running. Fed your precious system. And now, I think it's time I got my reward." Amara's eyes widened as she stared at him, her mind racing. "Reward? What are you talking about?" Trump didn't look at her. His focus remained on the throne, his smirk widening. "I've kept the people divided. Kept them afraid. I've given you more power than you've had in decades. And now I want what's mine." The figure's form grew brighter, its presence intensifying. "You presume to demand from the throne?" Trump's smirk faltered for just a moment, but he quickly recovered. "I'm not demanding. I'm collecting. You promised me strength, power, immortality. I've earned it." Amara watched in horror as the shadows began to shift, circling Trump like vultures. The whispers grew louder, their words merging into a deafening roar. "He does not belong. He is unworthy. Take him." Trump's confidence faltered as the shadows closed in, their forms twisting and writhing. "Wait," he said, his voice rising. "This isn't what we agreed." His words were cut off as the shadows enveloped him, their forms consuming him completely. The whispers fell silent, and the void seemed to hold its breath. Amara stared at the spot where he had stood, her mind reeling. But before she could process what had happened, the figure on the throne turned its gaze back to her. "You cannot escape," it said, its voice heavy with finality. "The system will endure. Always." And then, the ground beneath her gave way, and she was falling once again. Amara didn't just fall this time, she plummeted. It felt as though the entire weight of the void had coiled around her, pulling her down faster than her mind could comprehend. Shadows streaked past her, whispering incomprehensible words, fragments of thoughts she couldn't grasp. The oppressive golden light from the throne became a distant memory, replaced by an overwhelming darkness that seemed to devour everything in its path. She hit the ground hard, her knees buckling as she collapsed onto a cold, slick surface. This new place wasn't like the void or the fractured heaven she had seen before. The air was dense, suffocating, and reeked of sulfur and decay. The landscape stretched out in jagged formations of blackened stone, with rivers of molten gold cutting through the ground like veins. The sky above churned with storm clouds that glowed faintly, pulsing with flashes of red lightning. Amara pushed herself to her feet, her hands trembling. Her breaths came in shallow gasps as she took in her surroundings, her fear threatening to overwhelm her. She knew she wasn't alone. She could feel it, the eyes, the presence, the weight of something immense and unseen pressing down on her. And then she heard it. Footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, echoing across the jagged terrain like the toll of a distant bell. Amara turned, her heart pounding in her chest as a figure emerged from the shadows. At first, she thought it was one of the distorted beings she had seen before, but as it stepped into the dim light, her blood ran cold. It was Trump, but he was different now. His once sharp suit was tattered, his red tie frayed and stained. His skin had taken on a sickly gray hue, and his eyes burned with a faint golden glow that mirrored the molten rivers around them. "You," he spat, his voice rasping like gravel. "This is your fault." Amara took a step back, her mind racing. "My fault? You're the one who—" "Don't you dare," he interrupted, his voice rising. "Don't you dare pin this on me. I was promised power. I was promised everything. And now look at me." He gestured to himself, his hands trembling as though they could barely hold their form. "I gave them what they wanted," he said, his tone turning bitter. "I gave them fear. I gave them division. I fed the system. And for what? To be cast aside like garbage?" Amara stared at him, her anger bubbling to the surface. "You knew what you were doing," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "You chose this. You chose to manipulate people, to spread hate, all for your own gain. And now you're angry because the system used you the way you used everyone else." Trump's eyes flared, and for a moment, it looked as though he might lash out. But then his shoulders slumped, and the fury in his expression gave way to something else. Defeat. "They don't care," he muttered, almost to himself. "The system doesn't care about anyone. Not me. Not you. Not them. We're all just fuel for the machine." He turned away, his gaze falling on the molten rivers in the distance. "You can't beat the system," he said softly. "It always wins." Amara felt a chill run down her spine. The man who had once stood on podiums, rallying millions with his bravado and confidence, was now reduced to a shadow of himself. And yet she couldn't bring herself to pity him. Not after everything he had done. But before she could say anything, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The golden rivers churned violently, and the storm clouds above crackled with red lightning. The air grew heavier, pressing down on Amara's chest like an invisible weight. "They're coming," Trump said. "They don't like it when someone tries to break the rules." And all of a sudden he disappeared. The trembling grew stronger, and Amara could see shapes forming in the distance. Shadows rose from the ground, their forms twisting and writhing as they moved toward them. They were larger than the beings she had seen before, their presence more oppressive, more terrifying. Amara's heart raced, but she forced herself to stand her ground. "I'm not running," she said, her voice steady. "Not this time." The shadows closed in. The whispers returned, louder and more chaotic than ever, their words merging into a deafening roar. "She must be silenced. The system must endure. And her—" Amara clenched her fists, her fear giving way to anger. She wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. Not ever. As the first shadow lunged toward her, she stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You don't control me," she said, her words ringing out like a bell. The shadow froze, its form flickering as though her words had disrupted its very existence. The whispers faltered, their deafening roar replaced by a low, uncertain murmur. Amara didn't know. She didn't understand the power behind her words, the force that seemed to ripple through the air around her. But she didn't stop. "The system doesn't own us," she said, her voice growing stronger. "We are more than fuel. We are more than tools. And we don't need you." The shadows recoiled, their forms flickering and distorting. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the shadows dissolved. The whispers fell silent. The ground stopped trembling. The silence didn't last. The whispers returned, low and guttural, slithering into Amara's thoughts like parasites. The ground beneath her feet rippled, molten gold surging through the cracks. The void was alive again, the oppressive weight of the system reasserting itself. And then he reappeared. Trump materialized out of the shadows, his form no longer fractured or weakened. His suit was pristine again, his tie sharp and blood red, but his eyes, they burned brighter now, twin orbs of molten gold. His face was twisted into an expression of smug triumph, as though he had just won a game only he understood. "You thought you could win?" His voice was darker this time, reverberating through the air like a thunderclap. He laughed, a cold, mocking sound that made Amara's skin crawl. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about right or wrong. It's about control. And no one controls the system better than me. Amara took a step back, her fists clenched at her sides. "You're nothing but a puppet," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "You think you're in control, but you're just as trapped as everyone else." Trump's smile widened, his teeth glinting unnaturally in the dim light. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm no puppet. I'm the one pulling the strings. Do you know how much power it takes to stand where I stand? To keep billions of people scared, angry, and divided? The throne thrives because of me. The system needs me." Amara shook her head, her defiance growing stronger. "The system might need you, but that doesn't mean you're free. You're just another cog in the machine." For a moment, Trump's smile faltered, a flicker of something dark and desperate crossing his face. But he quickly recovered, his expression hardening. "And what about you, little prophet?" he sneered. "You think you're some kind of savior? You think your words mean anything? Let me tell you how this ends. You either join the system, or you get crushed by it." The ground trembled beneath them, the cracks widening as the golden light pulsed brighter. The air grew heavy with the weight of the system, pressing down on Amara like an invisible hand. The whispers swirled around her, their words sharp and cutting. "Submit. Obey. Feed the system." Amara gritted her teeth, forcing herself to stand tall. She wouldn't let them break her. "Not now. Not ever. I'm not joining you," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm not afraid of you." Trump's laughter echoed through the void. "Oh, you will be," he said, his golden eyes narrowing. "Because the system doesn't lose. It doesn't break. And it doesn't forgive." He raised his hand, and the shadows surged forward, their forms twisting and writhing as they surrounded Amara. The whispers grew louder, their voices merging into a deafening roar. But Amara didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her heart pounding as she stared down the shadows. "You think you're invincible," she said, her voice rising above the chaos. "But you're not. The system isn't as strong as you think. It feeds on fear, on control, on people like you. And without us, it's nothing." The shadows hesitated, their movements faltering as her words seemed to cut through the noise. The whispers wavered, their once deafening roar now fragmented and uncertain. Trump's smug expression cracked, his eyes narrowing as he took a step toward her. "Enough," he growled, his voice dripping with fury. "You don't get to talk about things you don't understand. You're nothing. You're no one. And you're about to disappear." But Amara wasn't finished. She took a step forward, her voice steady and unyielding. "You're right, I'm no one. I'm not powerful, I'm not special, and I'm not part of your system. But that's exactly why I can break it. Because I see what you don't. People don't need you. They don't need the throne. They don't need fear. They just need to see the truth." The golden light pulsed violently, the ground beneath her trembling as though the void itself was rebelling against her words. The shadows screamed, their forms distorting as they lashed out in all directions. But Amara didn't stop. "They'll see," she continued, her voice unwavering. "They'll see what you really are, a coward hiding behind a throne, a system built on lies. And when they do, you'll fall." Trump's face contorted with rage, his golden eyes flaring as he raised both hands. The shadows surged toward her, their forms merging into a massive wave of darkness that threatened to consume her entirely. But Amara stood her ground, her defiance burning brighter than her fear. "You don't scare me," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "And you never will." The wave of shadows crashed toward her, but just before it could reach her, a brilliant light erupted from within her. It wasn't the cold, oppressive glow of the throne. It was something warm, something pure. The light exploded outward, shattering the shadows and forcing Trump to stumble back, shielding his eyes. When the light faded, Amara was alone. Trump was gone, his presence erased as though he had never existed. The throne loomed in the distance, its chains broken, its once blinding glow now dim and flickering. Amara took a deep breath, the weight of the void lifting as she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She didn't know what had happened or what it meant. But she knew one thing for certain: the system wasn't invincible. It could be broken. And she wasn't done fighting. As the void began to dissolve around her, Amara felt herself being pulled upward, the oppressive darkness giving way to a soft, golden light. She didn't know where she was going, but she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The system might endure for now, but its days were numbered. And Amara would make sure the world knew the truth.